This is a lesson about abstract art. Now look at the vocabulary list here, and you will notice that although I'm beginning to talk about abstractions, we have a number of words here, some of which you know. Representational is a word that includes many different kinds of art that we can recognize. For example, we have this picture which is almost photographic. Now, art that is almost photographic is called naturalistic art, but this is one kind of representational art. Another kind of representational art is something that we call realism. Now, with realistic pieces, we can tell what they are very easily, but the artist hasn't tried to imitate the camera. So in this piece by Picasso, the figure is simplified, but we can tell right away that it's a figure. Now, in this piece by Paul Klee, we have a piece where we know it's a figure, but it's a figure that has been abstracted. And sometimes I will call a piece like this decorative abstraction, because the artist's reason for doing this was to produce an interesting decorative piece of artwork. So that all three of these pieces, though different, all come under the heading of representational art. Now, art that is not representational is called non-objective. Now, this term I'm quite sure you know, and it's really self-explanatory. It says no object. The artist hasn't used any object at all as his source for inspiration. And here we have a couple of pieces that are non-objective. This piece by Kandinsky and this piece by an unknown artist are both non-objective. We have shapes and colors that are interesting and exciting and pleasing, but the artist never meant for these to look like real things. Teachers and art specialists sometimes confuse these two terms. They will confuse things which are abstract and things which are non-objective. Just remember that things which are non-objective have no object that they were based on. Now, I have some other things that I want to show you. We have this piece by Picasso here, for example. And Picasso, when he was almost, not more than about 14 or 15 years old, was doing work like this, super photographic work. Then his work changed. Now, this is a realistic piece by Picasso, but we also have some abstract pieces by Picasso. Here is one piece by Picasso in which he has abstracted, that is to say, he has made some major changes in shapes. This is a picture of a cafe table. Then here's another piece by Picasso in which he has deliberately changed the shapes of the figure, but he's changing the shapes of the figure for purely decorative purposes, which is why I like to call paintings like this examples of decorative abstractions. And another piece by Picasso in which he's doing the same thing. He's using shapes and colors for purely decorative purposes. The figure and the chair are simply his starting point, his source of inspiration. And one last piece by Picasso, which is just slightly abstract. See, things which are only a little bit abstract are generally simply simplified. So here, this doesn't look like a photograph of a boy, but we know it's a boy. The shapes, the main shapes are there, and we can tell that right away. Now, in addition to painters doing abstractions, we also have other people who do abstractions for different reasons. For example, we have a political cartoon here. Now here, the size of the figure has been exaggerated. He's made to look very fat and very short, and his nose is made to look very long. This is sometimes called a caricature. Or even the cartoons that we see on greeting cards sometimes will have exaggerated parts to them. And then in the advertising world, sometimes commercial artists will produce abstractions for the sake of getting your attention. For instance, we know that these are birds, but they don't look like real birds, but they have enough of the main characteristics of birds for us to recognize them as birds. The two last words we have here are emphasize and characteristics. Emphasize simply means to stress or call special attention to those things about something that really tell us what it is. And the word characteristics means that we're going to look for those special things that distinguish one thing from another. So, for example, getting back to these birds again, they all have beaks, they all have feathers of one kind or another, so that although they may be imaginary birds, there have been enough bird characteristics here so that we can tell that those are birds. Also, from the advertising world, we have this commercial for a travel agency or for the telephone company. Now we can tell, although this is not a photograph of a telephone dial, that this is a telephone dial because all of the main characteristics are right here. And I have one other piece also from an ad from the Schlitz Brewery, and they're talking about a cow. Now, this is a very simple cow, but we know it's a cow. No real cow ever looked like this, but it has all the cow characteristics. We've got the horns, we've got the big nose, so we can tell very easily that it's a cow. I do want you to remember that abstract art always is based on something that we can recognize. Now, we have also from the world of commercial art some other examples. Here we have some samples of wallpaper. What we have here is a very realistic looking flower. And these are pretty realistic too. But then we have flowers that are less realistic. Now we're becoming a little bit more simplified. And with this last sample, these are some nice abstract flowers. We know that they're flowers because they have petal shapes and blossom shapes, but they've been simplified and the characteristics of flowers have been emphasized so we can tell right away what they are. Here we have two things. We have some drawings which are somewhat abstract that were done by a sculptor who later produced his work in metal. So here we've got these studies or these working drawings for a piece of sculpture that was later done. Now when we take a close look, if we've ever had the experience of being on a subway or being on a streetcar or a bus, then we can tell very easily what is happening here. And the same artist has produced these things. If you've ever seen a basketball game, you don't have to really look twice to know that these are basketball players. But these don't look like photographs. But we've got these nice tall figures. Why tall? Because basketball players are tall. So what the artist has done here, he has exaggerated, he has really emphasized the tallness of these figures. And he's done the same thing here with his piece of sculpture. This is a still life done in a very naturalistic fashion. It's almost photographic. And just remember that this is one kind of representational art.